Good morning, everyone. My name is Christy Taylor. I'm the Director of Programs and Partnerships at the Detroit Regional Chamber with our Education and Talent team. And just want to welcome you and thank you for joining us for this morning's webinar, Getting Started on Education Assistance. I know this topic is top of mind for many of us as we are dealing with the Great Resignation and thinking about new ways to support and invest in our workers. So this could not be more timely, and just really excited to have you all this morning for a great conversation. Jon Kaplan, who is our presenter, really is the expert in this space, and we are thrilled to have him today and as a partner to support our ongoing efforts to better help you develop and improve and scale education assistance programs to help you improve retention rates and create more opportunities for your employees to learn and move and grow in your company to fill those positions that I know you are all working to fill. Just a quick housekeeping note, you are all on mute. We've got a really big group today. So we'll be taking questions in the chat. We encourage you to ask questions as they come up. Please just put them in the chat and I will help moderate and get those over to Jon. He'll stop quite a bit throughout his presentation just to make sure we're addressing all of the questions and clarification that comes up from you. So please do put your questions in the chat and we will get those answered. So with that being said, we have a packed agenda. Jon has got a ton of great information for you. So I will turn it over to him and let him introduce himself and get us started. Thanks again for joining us and thank you, Jon.
Christy, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here and welcome everyone. This is a super interesting topic of discussion and I understand that it's top of mind. Just a little bit of background from me first, so everyone kind of knows who I am and where I come from. I've got a 25-year career in learning and talent management, and I've got some specific expertise in tuition and education assistance. I currently own and operate my own upskilling and reskilling firm. Just to give you an idea about my background, I started out as a high school teacher in inner city Oakland, California, and I taught economics and government to seniors in high school. I had an opportunity to start my own charter school, and eventually I left and went to the software industry. And I wrote training manuals for a big company called PeopleSoft. I eventually ended up at Oracle, where I ran a bunch of their training programs. At Visa, I ran all of Visa's client training programs, and I spent about 15 years at Discover as the chief learning officer, where I had responsibility for everything. One of the big things that I had responsibility for was education assistance. And we had a tuition reimbursement program that we managed to upgrade quite a bit. And that through that program, I actually ended up being featured in Forbes magazine, in the Wall Street Journal, in Fortune, in CNN Money. And so that was really about tuition and education assistance. So with that, I ended up feeling like, I could continue at Discover and help Discover employees. And there are about 17,000 Discover employees, or I could actually go out and try to help a broader audience. And I ended up starting my own consulting firm. It's called Corvantus Consulting. One of my great clients is the Detroit Regional Chamber of Commerce, but I also work with a company called JFF, or Jobs for the Future. I work with Guild Education. I work with Kaplan Education. If you know anything about the logistics industry, I'm working with a company called Prologis. I work for some private equity companies. Sterling Partners is one of them. And I've done some work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So that's sort of my background. Today, we're going to talk about education assistance, programs and goals and objectives. We're going to talk about the common challenges that people face when they try to round out their education assistance program. I'm going to give you 7 really just very clear steps to deploying an education assistance program. And I think this is for companies that don't have anything, or for companies that actually are looking to enhance their program. I think it's the same steps. Then we've got some final thoughts and suggestions, and I believe we'll have time for Q&A. As Christy mentioned, if you have any questions along the way, put them in the chat. I will be stopping periodically to see what questions come up, and we'll see if we can get your question answered as we go through, but there are going to be time for questions at the end. Okay. Now, the reason why this is such a compelling topic right now is the employment landscape is more volatile and complex than any time in the past 40 years. And so don't believe me? Well, here's an Inc. article that says the labor shortage isn't going away anytime soon unless companies make these changes. So it's on the top of mind and companies are being called to make big changes. The New York Times had an article. Despite labor shortages, workers see few gains in economic security, and that's where a lot of this anxiety is coming from. There's a Washington Post article, the most unusual job market in modern American history explained. And finally, Vox had an article, remote work isn't the problem, work is. So I think we're being called upon as HR practitioners and as people responsible for many of these workers, we're being called upon to think about the world differently. And I have to say, it feels like a crisis. It feels like a crisis probably to most of us. And I always think that when you're facing a crisis, it's typically the best approach to implement some immediate fixes and some long-term measures. And that's usually the best approach. And so, I think the way I think about sort of these immediate fixes versus long-term fixes, in the immediate, is there anything we can do to make work better for employees? Okay, and that really, there may be some quick things that we can do to make the work better for employees. In the long run, gosh, can we make employees better for work? Because there is a mismatch in between what the employees bring to the table and what work needs. And so I'm just going to give you a few ideas for sort of immediate fixes. We're not going to go into these in any great detail, but if you're looking for things to do right away, I mean, number one, it's you read this everywhere, listen to your employees. So I would, if there's a lot of anxiety and you haven't done this already, schedule a listening tour and spend some time with your employees. And just the mere act of being listened to can make a big difference. The second thing is to evaluate work-life balance. And I think over time in the United States, we have expected more and more from employees. And right now, I believe the latest data is that American work week is longer than anywhere in the OECD. And that's an indication just the changing work-life balance. Now, this doesn't mean you should necessarily have to require less of your employees, but if you can evaluate it in a way, give people more time to carve out some time for themselves, that can be really helpful. I know one company that I work with just basically mandated no emails after 7 p.m. And that just really made employees feel like they're being respected, their time's being respected. Consider flexible work options. So I think commuting is a big problem for many employees. And I think when the companies that went to fully remote and now are trying to figure out how we get people back in the office, the most successful companies I think are going to be those that have flexible work options where employees can do some of both. And last thing is get serious about recognition. And I would think that for if we have any CHROs on board, one of the things you can do is buy every single manager a stack of cards that they can write out, handwritten cards to employees to recognize them and thank them for their effort. That can go a long ways. So those are just some initial ideas. Those are the things that I see going on. In the long run, how do we help employees to raise their game and so that they doesn't feel like there's such a big gap in between what the employers want and what employers provide? And here are a few ideas. Fostering a culture of learning, like a learning culture is written about everywhere, and like there's a way of doing this, and we'll probably end up talking about this a little bit later. Build formal work-based learning programs is another. These are mentorships, rotations, etc. Establishing an education assistance program, that's what we're going to talk about today. In the long run, I really think companies should be thinking more about mental health options. At one of the companies I worked at, one of the things all the operations managers said that they had never seen the incidence of mental health crises among their employees, especially younger employees. And there's a lot of things going into that, but evaluating mental health is something that's going to be increasingly important over time. Now, I don't have enormous experience with mental health options, but fostering a culture of learning, building formal work-based learning programs, and established educational assistance, those are all things that are perfectly within my wheelhouse. Today, we're going to talk about establishing education assistance programs, and we have 2 more webinars set up one to talk about formal work-based learning programs, and one to talk about building a learning culture. Okay, so we're going to be able to cover the top three for you. All right, so let's do this. What we're going to do is we're going to take a quick poll. And what I'd like you to do is, if you actually look at the top of your screen, you'll see that one of your options is the option that's called, I believe, annotate. If you click on it, you're going to be able to annotate my screen. And what you can do is you can pick a check mark or an arrow. And what we're going to do is I'm going to show you a poll. There are 5 different options, A, B, C, D, or E. And I'll read through the options. And if you could click on the one that best represents yourself. So here's our poll. Where are you in your education or tuition assistance journey? So A, we've never had an education assistance program and are just now contemplating our options. Number 2, or option B, we've just recently launched our program and are looking for ways to enhance what we currently provide. Option C, we've had an education assistance program for a while, but feel that it isn't living up to our hopes and expectations. Option D, we had an education assistance program for a while and are generally happy with what we provide, but we also recognize that there might be opportunities to improve and we haven't considered. And then number C, letter C, none of the above. I just really like Zoom meetings and I'm here for the additional Zoom meetings. Okay, so if you would, please put a check mark, a scribble, an arrow in whichever one of these applies to you, and we'll just sort of see the preponderance of annotation should help us understand where most attendees reside. Look at this, everyone's sort of getting this figured out. Look at this, you know, it's interesting. It looks like option D is the one that has the most folks. Okay, that is great. There might be improvement opportunities we hadn't considered. Great. Okay, yeah, so it sort of looks like C and D are the ones that are most common. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, if I don't erase these, what ends up happening is they will clutter up every single slide after this. So we'll give people another 15 seconds, and then I will hit erase, and then we can. Oh, look, we've got some. Howard is like Zoom meetings. So Howard, we're really glad you joined us. So, all right, and I believe. Okay, I'm going to clear all the drawings. So last drawings. Okay, great. So the majority of folks have some sort of education assistance program and are just sort of thinking about how they can improve it. And really what we're going to talk about today is sort of the process that you can go through, sort of how do you actually make a big change in education assistance? How do you start an education assistance program? Or maybe how do you make a big change given that there are so many cross-cutting priorities and there are always going to be a scarce allocation of resources within companies. And so really a lot of today is about how do you position yourself most effectively to come up with the right solutions and sell it internally to your stakeholders. And as we go through, if people have, you know, I'll see if I can make some comments about the types of things that I've seen clients do, the things we did at Discover, and the type of things that I've seen other clients do that will help generate some ideas for how you can improve your education assistance program. So let's start, and we're gonna just clear one more time. All right, there we go. All right, so let's talk about sort of why companies establish education assistance programs, and there are really 5 main objectives. It's usually a sort of a combination of talent acquisition, talent retention, skill development, capability building, or corporate brand building. And so talent acquisition, oftentimes it's really hard to actually get people who are in your target demographic to come work for you if they don't have opportunities to advance. Talent retention is sometimes they come and then they leave, right? And so what are the things that are going to hold them there? Skill development, and I differentiate skill development from capability building. Skill development is really around transferable skills that actually can help employees in any role. So critical thinking, problem solving, et cetera. Those are things that can really help employees. capability building is really specific skills that the company needs to succeed. So for example, right now, it is very hard to hire people with analytics backgrounds. And so maybe the short-term play is you overpay for analytics talent, but the long-term play is you build it within. So that's an example of capability building. And corporate brand building this is a Starbucks model, is one of the things they did is they took their education assistance program and turned it externally and used that as to help burnish their brand. Now, my premise is that no program is going to do all of these equally well. Okay, but so there's going to have to be some picking and choosing that you do. But these are the types of things that education assistants can do. So let's so despite this, you can achieve some of these objectives, maybe most of these objectives, probably not all. But the problem is education assistance programs usually come with a lot of challenges. So low participation rates is really common. Sort of 5% of your population is a very high participation rate. Spotty program data. Oftentimes you have education assistants, but you can't even tell everyone sort of what programs people are enrolled in. When they graduate is another one. Logistical frustrations is really a very common problem among participants, is they have to submit their grades, they have to submit authorizations, all that can be really frustrating. Low graduation rates is another one, that you can enroll a lot of people, but you actually either don't see them graduate because you don't have the data, or they actually leave before they graduate. And the final one is high administration costs. And this is I've seen this occasionally, not that often, but sometimes just all that administrative burden can be difficult. And so what I'll tell you is that success requires meeting some of these objectives while minimizing all of these challenges. And so really, you're not going to be great at talent acquisition, talent retention, skill development, capability building, and corporate brand building. So it may be important to just identify a couple of these that are most important, but at the same time, you really have to address all of these challenges. And so I'm going to give you a quick 7-step formula for how you're going to proceed and be able to achieve this. And what I'll tell you is the 7 steps are as follows. The first is being really clear about what your objectives are. The second is gathering all the relevant data that's going to help you prove your case and really understand how you're going to target your program. The third is to run the numbers and make sure that you have at least some type of ROI that's acceptable to your stakeholders. The fourth is to gather feedback and build alliances, because it's rare that one person can pull off an education assistance program all by themselves. The fifth is to really build out, sort of envision what your optimal program is. After 5 or 10 years, what do we want our education assistance program to be? Number 6 is determine how you're going to phase that rollout. And number 7 is make your case. So you're going to be able to be in a position to really forcefully advocate for your program. So we're going to stop right here. And Christy, do we have any questions that have come in?
Not yet. Not yet, Jon. So keep going. And
okay.
If questions come up as Jon goes, please drop them in the chat and we will get those answered.
Great. All right, so we're going to start with step 1, is defining your objectives. And 3 questions to help you get started. Who do you really work for? Now, and what I mean by this is you probably have a boss, but oftentimes there are other stakeholders that are much more important in your sort of in sort of your network of colleagues. When I've been in situations, oftentimes I report to the chief HR officer, but really when you get down to it, the CEO is the one who's driving the agenda, because the CEO was really interested in learning. There's another place I was where I worked for the CHRO, but I ended up actually the operations senior vice presidents were the ones who were really my primary stakeholders, and I really worked for them. So who do you really work for? Number 2 is, what are they really passionate about? Because understanding what the CEO is passionate about versus the operations leads, really different things, right? And then the third is, how can education assistants help them succeed? And that's really sort of put yourself in their shoes to really identify, like, what do they want from the education assistance program? So I'm going to give you some generalizations that I've seen with clients and in my own career. CEOs often focus on brand and talent. What they want to know is our corporate brand something that I can be proud of? When I go to the golf club, and I'm talking to other CEOs in my context, is this something I can talk about and feel really proud about? and like, do we have the right talent for, the next 10 or 15 years? That's sort of the CEO perspective usually. CHROs often focus on the HR budget. So oftentimes HR is a cost center, and basically every year the CFO comes to HR and says, "Hey, I know healthcare is going up at 7% a year, but we want the HR budget to be flat, or even reduced just a little bit." So what is the that's typically what the CHROs think about. Well, the CLOs, this is what I was. CLOs typically focus on skills and capabilities, and so that's what really got me excited. Is, gosh, we can use the education assistance program to build these skills. Business leaders often focus on attrition because this is the one thing that's most difficult for them when they just don't have the right butts in seats. So the first thing I would say you have to do is really understand who you really work for, what they're passionate about, and how can education assistants help them succeed. Here's what I would say is a pro tip. Choose one objective as your core focus area, and think about all the other areas as spillover benefits. And so this is what we did at Discover. At Discover, what we said is what's most important is talent acquisition. We felt like if we had a great education assistance program, we could use it in all of our employment brand collateral. We could go out and get people who are hungry for education, and those were the kind of people we wanted to work for us because we felt that they could progress in the organization better. So we basically said, whatever we do, it's got to be focused on talent acquisition. Now, skill development's important, some capability building, some talent retention, but really talent acquisition. That was our number one objective. All right, let's go to step 2, and then we'll stop for questions. So step 2 is to gather your data. How can you estimate the cost of the primary problem you're trying to solve? Okay, so I'll read that again. How can you estimate the cost of the primary problem to solve? So what is the cost of the trouble attracting the right talent? Okay, that could be open seats, right? You can't fill your seats because it takes time to, they're just open requisitions go unfilled for months on end. Or it could be hiring the wrong people and having to actually, move them into other roles, or sort of, move them out of the company if they don't fit. How can we retain employees we need? So what's the cost of that problem? We can't retain employees. So a high attrition is a cost to the company. What's the cost of our employees struggle to handle the complexity of work? So maybe they're making a lot of mistakes at work. That has a cost. We need specialized capabilities to succeed. Well, so that's capability building. Maybe you're having to overpay for talent, and I see this a lot in the analytics sphere. That bachelors coming out of people coming out of college with a bachelor's in analytics, are getting easy into the six figures. $150,000 for a 22-year-old with analytics background. You could see that as overpaying. We need a more positive image in the community. So this was actually common in the financial services industry, where it's heavily regulated, and actually not having a positive image in the community can hamper your ability for acquisitions and mergers. And that's something that I know that our executives felt very strongly at Discover. So I'm going to give you 2 examples. Here's an example 1 of estimating the cost of attrition. Let's say you're small company, you've got a total headcount of 200 people. Let's say the average annual compensation, all in, that's benefits, et cetera, is about $80,000. Let's say your total attrition rate right now is 10%. Maybe it's more than this. Maybe it's 15 or 20%. But let's say your attrition rate is 10%. The annual cost of attrition, I just got this from Society of Human Resources Management, is about 40% of that annual salary. So the cost of the annual attrition is 10% of 200, or 20 times 40% of 80. And I've calculated that to $640,000 a year. So the company loses $640,000 a year every year because of attrition. Now that's something maybe no one's thought of, right? And that's going to be very helpful when you say, "Hey, I've got a way to solve this problem. We've got a hole in our bathtub that's leaking $640,000 every year. I can help solve that problem." Okay. Let me give you one other example. What is the estimated annual cost of failure to attract the right talent? So here's the way that I thought of doing this, that maybe your net annual income is about $25 million. You have about 200 employees. Let's say that, then if you just do the quick division, you say the annual profit per employee on average is about $125,000. Obviously, that that annual profit is probably disproportionately at the higher levels of the company. But let's just say, for rough numbers, that if you take $25 million divided by 200 employees, it's about $125,000 of profit per employee. And monthly employee cost of vacancy is $125,000 divided by 12. So basically, every month that you fail to put a person in a seat, and this is like, for example, sales. If you fail to put a salesperson in a seat that is open, you are losing a certain amount of money each month. And you could calculate this at 10.55 or $10,500. Okay, so those are two ways of estimating the cost of failures. Here's a quick pro tip. There are really few established ways to quantify the exact cost of the problem that you're trying to solve. So do some research, but expect to use your creativity. Okay, and so that's one of the things that is really up to your creativity. And when you get a chance to justify this in front of stakeholders, people may point some fingers and say that's not exactly the way I calculate it, but rough approximation, probably annual estimated cost of failure to attract the right talent, $10,000 per month, if for a company of 25 million annual profits, is probably not a bad estimate. Okay. Similarly, a company with 10% attrition rate, $640,000 per year. That's probably about right. Maybe up or down 10%, but it's probably pretty close. So let's stop and see what questions we have.
So far, no questions. You're being very
fabulous. Yeah, exactly. Okay, good. Okay, but not to say that we don't welcome questions. We do welcome questions. But all right. So step 3. Let's talk about step 3. Step 3 is to run your numbers, and this is where you really develop a back of the envelope model to quantify the financial trade-offs you're going to face. Okay, and this is, once again, this is for enhancing your program. You can use the same approach for enhancing your program as you would for establishing your program. But really, the questions you have to ask is, how much will education assistance cost? So if you're planning to enhance your program, how much will the enhancement cost? And you estimate the following: how many people are going to participate? What's the average cost per participant? What are your overall program administration costs? So say, for example, you want to enhance your program and you want to expand eligibility. So basically at Discover, one of the things we had was a 1-year tenure requirement to participate in the program. And we got rid of it. And there's reasons we got rid of it. We saw the highest attrition levels in our first year employees. So we got rid of that tenure requirement because we felt like getting people involved in tuition reimbursement right away would actually help them, would help nail them to the company. That we wouldn't have people leaving the company because they couldn't participate in these programs. So you can calculate, the expansion of participation, what that costs. So the second question you want to ask is, how can you quantify the size of the benefit? And we've already actually done quite a bit of this. We've estimated the cost of the problem you're trying to solve, right? The third question that you're going to answer is, can you show that the benefits of the program will offset, or mostly offset, you may not need to get it 100%, the estimated cost of the program? And really what you're just going to do is a cost benefit analysis. Okay. Now I've got a couple examples for you. I got one example for you. I'll show you how I did this, how I've done this for companies. So the cost estimate, let's say the cost per credit hour, let's say on average, you negotiate really hard, $300. Okay, that's sort of an average cost per credit hour. That's going to take some tough negotiation, but you can get it down to about $300 per credit hour. The average number of credit hours per year estimated at 15. So that's sort of a part-time load going the entire year. The annual cost per participant, that means 15 times 300, which is 4,500. Average financial aid. One of the things at Discover we did was we required every participant to fill out a FAFSA, or a free application for federal student aid. And the reason why we did that is we felt like there are a lot of employees who would qualify for a Pell Grant, and that we use that to offset the cost of our program. And that actually went a long ways to actually funding the expansion of the program. The net cost per participant, that means is 4,500 minus 2,000, which is 2,500. The estimated annual participants, in this particular case, we just say, look, it's going to be 10 people, okay? Or we're going to expand the program by 10 people. So that means the total tuition cost is about $25,000. The total program administration cost, we just estimated being $10,000. That's like, a quarter time for one person to manage the program. And so the total program costs are $35,000. Now, if we go back to our other example where we estimated the annual cost of attrition at $640,000, we wanted to take the attrition cost and just drop it by 5%. So 5% of $640,000 is $32,000. You can see that here total program cost is about $35,000. Total program benefit is about $32,000. Pretty darn close, $3,000. So, the thing is, you don't actually necessarily need to completely offset your program. In my experience, corporate executives, when they look at something like this, they go, gosh, well, that's all it's going to be. It's going to be just $5,000 either way. Fine, that's not a problem. So here's a pro tip for you. Don't get too hung up on the technical accuracy of your model. It's simply a means to give you a best guess estimate of how to compare cost and benefits. Okay. And that's really what you want to do. And there are a couple of reasons why you want to do this. You want to give your executives some comfort that you've actually thought about the numbers. Having been in HR a lot of my life, the stereotype of the HR professional is not one that is focused on running the numbers all the time, and so you can burnish your own credibility by running the numbers. Second thing is that the chances are that no one else in the company is going to have a more accurate way of thinking of costs and benefits, and if you put one forward, you're going to anchor the discussion around, hey, is it going to cost us $3,000 to expand the program, or is it going to benefit the company by $3,000? Is it going to be somewhere in there? That's kind of the conversation that you want to have. All right, let's stop there. Christy, do we have any questions coming in?
There is one question.
Yes.
Jon, can you talk about the benefits and drawbacks of offering upfront tuition assistance versus tuition reimbursement that's paid out after the fact?
That's a really great question. Okay, so here I'll cover the benefits first, and I've seen a lot of this. When you have employees who have to pay out of pocket and then wait to get reimbursed, it ties up a huge amount of their cash flow. And it exposes them to an inordinate amount of risk. And so oftentimes what happens is there are people who can't fund their bachelor's degree because they can't come up with the cash. And that's I mean, if you have an employee that's making, under $40,000 a year, to write a check for $3,000 for the tuition is just, it's very difficult for them to do that. So you depress participation because people can't fund that initial check. The other cost is actually there's a risk that they have. And this is usually tied to requiring a grade to get reimbursement, requiring a C+ and above or something like that. Oftentimes what we saw happen was an employee, their life would spin out of control at some point. Maybe their car would break down, or a family member would get sick, and they'd prioritize. They have family, they've got work, and they've got school. They would drop school and they'd get an F in a course. And if you have actually a grade-based system to determine whether or not someone gets reimbursed, what ends up happening is someone who has shelled out $3,000 all of a sudden doesn't get reimbursed for it because they got a bad grade. Now, that ruptures the relationship between company and employee, that there's this, any trust that they had is immediately dissipates. And typically what happens is they leave the company. And we looked at that and we decided that what we wanted to do is we wanted to pay the institutions directly. We formed some partnerships where we could actually pay the institutions directly. So we wouldn't actually have to, the employees wouldn't have to fund their sort of the upfront tuition. And we actually went from a grade-based system to a cumulative GPA system, where we actually authorize people to participate semester by semester based on their cumulative GPA and their standing within the company. As long as they had a cumulative GPA of over 2.0, we paid for the course no matter what, even if they failed it. Now, that was actually sort of a hard pill for some of our operations executives to swallow, but we explained to them, like, look, is it worth losing an employee over $33,000 or $2,500 because they feel so stiff that you haven't paid for their tuition. And ultimately, it's just probably better to just to pay the amount, hold your nose, and just move on. And if their GPA drops below 2.0, you say, hey, you got to focus on school, bring up your GPA. You're welcome back into the program as soon as you got to fund your own education until you can get a 2.0. As soon as you're above a 2.0, we'll start paying for your tuition again. And that's a very positive message. It's just like, for you, you're not getting enough out of this program to warrant us paying for it. So you pay for it. If you can demonstrate that you're getting enough out of this program, we'll start paying for it again. That great question. All right, we're going to keep on going on, and we'll answer. Hopefully there are more questions like that. That was a fabulous question. All right, so step 4, gather feedback and build alliances. And this is something that's, it's rare that that the head of learning can actually build one of these programs all by themselves. So spend some time talking to all the potential beneficiaries of the program and get them on your side. So your program may be focused on solving one or two of the problems we identified, but there are going to be many beneficiaries across the company. And so enlist your potential stakeholders in validating your assumptions. What might you have missed? So I know that I personally did a roadshow. I went around and talked to everyone who was a stakeholder in our education assistance program to make sure that I had them on my side. The more you can work with their feedback into the program design and your final pitch, the more allies you have. So what I would do is I'd sit down with executive vice presidents. I'd say, hey, here's what we're thinking. What feedback do you have? When they gave me feedback, I would work it into the model, into the presentation. I'd get right back to them and say, hey, thanks for the feedback. Here's how I updated the pitch. All right. Here's a pro tip for all of you. Recognize the different interests your stakeholders might have, and be prepared to shift the focus of your pitch to where your interests align. So example, when you're meeting with the head of operations, this program really is going to be focused on, or let's say you're meeting with their CHRO and you've worked out this program with your head of operations. This program's going to be focused on reducing attrition, but I see a lot of benefits to improving the capabilities of your employees. Okay, so be acknowledged that where the program is focused, but make sure to articulate where the spillover benefits could be. And for example, at Discover, one of the things we did is we recognized we needed computer engineers. In the long run, I mean, Discover is actually a technology company as much as a financial services company, but we knew we needed engineers. And the engineering, like, we're going to pay for employees and hire engineers with advanced degrees. But what's our 5-year play or our 10-year play? What's going to make sure that we have that pipeline of talent established? So 2 of the programs we built, or 2 of the bachelor's programs we identified were one in computer engineering and one in computer programming. And so we had 2 separate bachelor's degree programs, paid 100% of tuition. We prepaid. We did everything we could to get people enrolled in computer engineering programs because we had a talent need there. So the focus was really on talent acquisition, but we were also able to say to the head of the IT organization, hey, look, this is really focused on talent acquisition, but the great thing about this is we're going to create a pipeline of talent of computer engineers. And if you have a starting computer engineering positions or quality assurance positions, you can actually start looking at our operations group and get them involved in mentorships, get them involved in job rotations, and see if you want to hire them. You can do that, low risk if you're just promoting internally, because you can try people out for a little bit. So it ended up being really, really successful. Okay. Let's do one more and then we'll stop for questions. So step 5, envision the optimal program. And this is where we've been talking about, like, what is the perfect program? Do some research and envision your ideal program, answering as many questions as possible. So here's question 1. Who's going to be eligible? What are their tenure requirements? What about full-time versus part-time employees? At Discover, I think we basically said everyone was available day 1 of employment. And in fact, the way people could start their degree, they could start their degree six weeks ahead and actually get into the program on day one of employment. We basically said that you had to be, I think, 3/4 time to participate in the program. The reason why we did that is we wanted to encourage as many people who are part-time to move to full-time, because part-time employees is just harder managing them. So we wanted to create those incentives to become a full-time employee. What type of education will you cover? What type of degrees? What about non-degree programs? So at Discover, one of the things we did is we identified 3 different universities that we thought were really great for working adults. And there are universities that focus on working adults. I mean, most of us think about tier 1 research universities, University of Michigan, et cetera. Really most tier 1 research universities are not great for working adults. And so we found some smaller players that were just great for working adults. And we covered 7 different degrees. I've seen a lot of companies, what they do is they actually think about non-degree programs as well. And if you can get non-degree programs for certificates, credentials, that really helps as well, but you have to kind of think all that through. Number 3, how much will you pay per employee? How will you handle fees, books, and supplies? So a lot of companies just go up to the federal, sort of maximum shelter of $5,250 for a bachelor's degree. What I've seen companies do is have different tiers. So $2,500 for an associate's degree, $5,250 for a bachelor's degree, $10,000 for a graduate degree. So interestingly enough, I've seen the companies that I think the fees, books, and supplies are actually a fairly small expense. That's not a huge expense. Being able to say that you are providing free college to your employees, that is incredibly powerful. And if for Discover, our goal was talent acquisition, being able to say on day one, 100% free bachelor's degree program awaits you if you come to work for us was incredibly powerful. And it was worth just making that additional incremental expense on fees, books, and supplies. On the other hand, if your goal is something else, that may not be as important to you. And it may be more important if you're capability building, it may be more important to invest in, a subset of really important degrees for you that actually, and not focus too much on the fees, books, and supplies. How will you administer the program? Will you outsource the administration? One of the things that we found at Discover was that administration of tuition reimbursement and education assistance was just time consuming, prone to error, frustrating for our employees. And it was very difficult to manage all the data. We outsourced the whole thing. And there are companies that are good at outsourcing and they do it for relatively low cost. So you think about whether or not you want to outsource administration. And I think a lot of companies are doing this. Number 5, how will you market and drive adoption of the program? We worked at Discover, we worked really closely with the talent acquisition team and the communications team to make sure that we could really drive adoption of the program. The last question, what types of wraparound services will you provide? Academic coaching, graduation celebrations, wraparound, in the name of education assistance, wraparound programs are everything. It is very difficult for people to maintain engaged in an education assistance program for the duration that they're going to need to for 6 years. That's very difficult. One of the things that I've seen companies do that's really helpful is they create study groups and they basically create them formally or informally, but a group of people who are taking the same courses, who can meet every week, give them company resources. So either a space to meet or time. In some companies, what they'll do is they'll basically say, hey, we're going to give you, if you're enrolled in the program, we're going to give you 4 hours of study time, paid study time. And so everyone would meet on a Wednesday afternoon and get their work done. Those things are really, really helpful. And I'll tell you that just for working adults, it's difficult to maintain your enthusiasm for a program that's going to last 6 years. And so these wraparound services are really important. Here's your pro tip. Document the details of your future program. Follow thought leaders and update your vision as you learn from laced innovation. So this is around, just there's a lot written about this, and sort of what are the best kind of programs. There are consultants that can help you with this. I know that some of these outsourced providers can actually help work through your policy. And so if you really think about where you want to be 5 years from now, document all that, and that's a great vision document. So I'm going to stop right there. Christy, what kind of questions do we have?
Two really good ones
Great.
in the chat. First, what are some costs that a company should consider when scaling to include international employees? Is it best to establish an education program in both countries?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the thing about education assistance is that education systems, United States is very peculiar in terms of most advanced industrialized countries, that we don't actually pay for bachelor's degrees for our citizens. It's really actually sort of an aberration in the United States that we actually force people to go into debt. We think of education as an investment in future capability as opposed to, sort of a human right of our citizens. So when I've looked at this, I haven't seen a huge need for a non-US education assistance program, because by and large, degrees in foreign countries are pretty cheap and pretty accessible. Now, in graduate degrees, there's a difference when you get to graduate degrees, and we can talk about graduate degrees. What I've seen companies do is handle graduate degrees as a one-off, sort of a specific contract with a specific employee that you're trying to develop, and I've seen that done a whole lot. But oftentimes, because post-secondary education, it looks so different in so many different countries, I've seen companies trying to focus on US based very separately from they focused on non-US based, and non-US based is sort of cash, a cash stipend for someone who's going to participate in a graduate degree. So, okay, second question.
Second question. You touched on this a bit, but can you just expand thoughts on, coursework and major requirements, right? So should major have to be tied to the current company or the current product, or should folks be more open about major selection?
Yeah, so I'll tell you that there's, that I think there was a school of thought that, people had to get a degree in something that was very specific to their work at the company. And I think, most companies are sort of backing off on that a little bit, little by little. And I think the thing is that a post-secondary degree in the United States is really about enhancing your problem solving, your critical thinking, your numeracy, your literacy. It's all these sort of transferable skills. And honestly, if you get a degree in anthropology, you're working on the same sort of critical reasoning skills that you would if you worked in something else. Now, that's sort of a hard sell oftentimes in a company to, sort of fund people's bachelors in anthropology. And I got to say, that was not something that was worth for me when I just saw the way the sentiments within the company lined up. It just wasn't worth fighting that. I would have said, anything in social sciences is fine. I think what we ended up doing is we ended up saying business degrees, business degrees, organizational management, and computer science were the three focus areas where we paid 100%. And everything else was possible, but people would have to write a description of like how they were going to, why it was important to them as their work at the company. And that's probably not a bad thing. I think just forcing people to be thoughtful about why they're pursuing a specific degree. That said, I think there's there are a lot of companies that basically say, our goal is to upskill you, and if your career journey takes you outside of the company, that is fine. We want to make sure that that you have those skills, and this is 100% for employees. And I actually think there's enormous power in being able to say to your employees, this is for you. Any degree you want. We're going to require that it's a bachelor's degree, and we're going to require that it is 100% accredited, but anything you can come up with, because we are using this opportunity to invest in you. I think there's so much power in that I think it's worth having people in the company that are getting, degrees in, nursing or whatever. And for example, Amazon does this. They're actually, part of their program is to train people for jobs outside of Amazon. And I can see the value in doing that. So my personal sentiment is make the program as expansive as possible and as wide ranging as possible. recognizing that maybe for, especially if you're starting small, that's going to be a fight with many of your corporate executives who just don't think the same way. So, all right. We're going to come back to questions in a little bit. Let's get to step 6, phase your rollout. So once you know what the optimal program looks like, choose the barest minimum starting attributes. And I think a lot of you already have programs, so maybe this is less relevant to people. But remember, when you're rolling out programs, the less complexity, the greater the chance of success. One of the things I was scared of, one of the things that we did, we had some hurdles to participate right at the beginning. And I forget what the hurdle was, but there was some sort of hurdle that we had. And I remember thinking to myself that my biggest fear was that we were going to all of a sudden get thousands of people who joined the program, and they weren't going to be well suited for the program, and they were going to quit within 3 months or 6 months, and it was going to look bad for everyone. So I sort of said, let's keep those gates up a little bit to start with, because I just didn't want everyone flooding in and having the program overwhelmed and people frustrated. So less complexity, greater chances of success. Chalk up some early wins, and build advocates for expansion. So when you get those emails from people who say, this is great, I've always wanted to get a bachelor's, never understood how I was going to do it, and I'm so thankful to be working for this company that provides this, save that email, okay? And develop a scrapbook of all the wonderful things you hear, and you'll hear a lot of wonderful things. Define 5 or 6 phase expansion. They're going to be ready to augment the program when the time is right. All right, here's a pro tip. Avoid trying to be things to all people too early in your program's evolution. So expand your program as new objectives are defined. So really, when you've identified your program, it's really all about capability building. We're just focused on analytics and computer engineering. When people come in and they say, oh, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. Nope. For now, this rollout is about computer engineering and analytics. We're going to get to that in the future. We had a planned expansion for Q4 of next year. Okay, but just avoid being all things to all people right away. Christy, any questions have rolled in?
Yep, I've got one more.
Okay.
Can you talk about, and I know we can follow up with more of this because I know we have it, but can you talk about some of the data and research in terms of like how these programs can contribute to retention, and sort of the nuances, like if a benefit's offered right away versus requiring 1 year of employment, how does that impact retention? How does the amount offered impact retention? Can you just share some sort of high level data?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so there are some great studies around the return on investment of tuition reimbursement programs. I actually participated in one of these studies, and so if you look, the Lumina Foundation has done 3 or 4 of these studies. There's one on Cigna, there's one on Discover, there's one on a Midwest bank that they didn't reveal who it was. I think they did one on Walmart as well. So those studies are available. They didn't spend a lot of time going into the nuances about, well, what about this degree versus that degree? What about, sort of year 1 versus immediate? I think that's subject to just at this point anecdotal insight. What I'll tell you is that the ROI for education assistance program is astronomical. At Discover, we found our ROI was 141%. Okay, with that meant this was tuition program. This is even before we expanded it. What we found is that if you look at just absenteeism, retention, promotions, and lateral transfers into more complex jobs, for every dollar we spent on tuition reimbursement, we got that dollar back plus another $1.41 in saved talent management costs. Okay, and that study is publicly available. It's on the Lumina website. If you look for Discover Financial Services, Lumina Foundation, you'll find it on their site. But there's a bunch of studies like that. From an anecdotal perspective, what I'll tell you is I think that these programs are that they provide so much opportunity that even if you end up, you should expand them as much as possible. I mean, in my mind, 141% return on investment means you can expand this, quite a bit, and end up, if you drop below 141% ROI, you're still making, a great return. Most companies have a hurdle for investments at sort of, 10 to 15%. So I mean, this exceeds that by many factors. One thing I will just point out, One thing we noticed that aspect when we segmented the data, we looked at MBAs. MBAs have a negative ROI. Okay, and the reason is because MBAs have are a credential that people use to go get other jobs. And so what we found is when we actually paid for people as MBA programs, that was highly correlated with their departure after they got the MBA. So that actually drove attrition up. And what but we had a whole plan about we were going to actually try and steer people away from MBAs, et cetera. So, all right, let's get step 7, make your final pitch. If you've already talked to all your potential advocates, you already have a lot of support. So frame your pitch around what the key decision maker really cares about. Okay, if you're in front of the CEO, it's probably going to be corporate brand and long-term talent needs, right? That's just probably where that person is thinking. If it's in front of the CHRO, it's probably about, hey, look, we're spending a lot of money on all these development programs. We can consolidate them and drive down overall spend by launching a tuition reimbursement program or an education assistance program that actually brings down the average cost of credit quite a bit. So. Reference the support you have from your allies. That was something, hey, I've talked to this person, they're all really supportive. These are the things that they really value about this program. Avoid promising too much, okay, because eventually I've had some, I've seen some problems with people promising too much. Be willing to start with a limited trial or proof of concepts. One thing I know at a lot of companies, if you call something a proof of concept and you do it in a subsection of the business, you can do almost anything. So, if you can't convince your CEO or CHRO, work with an executive to do something as a proof of concept, and you can get a lot done usually that way. Here's a pro tip. Remember that it's rare that executives have the opportunity to meet the needs of shareholders, employees, customers, and community members all at the same time. Your key decision makers, more likely than not, are looking for a reason to say yes. Education assistance programs are things that are just uniformly good all around. And if you can figure out the finances so it doesn't look like it puts a huge hit in the budget, your executives are going to be looking for an opportunity to say yes. Because when they're on the golf course, being able to say, yeah, we provide free education to all our employees on day one of employment, that goes a long way. Like, just people like doing that. All right, I'm gonna go over some quick final thoughts, and then we'll stop for some questions. So, the complexity of all this can really feel overwhelming. Here are just a few things to make it more manageable. First, there's a lot of great information that you can find. Much of the work's already been done. Second thing is start small and expand when the time is right. Third is consider outsourcing tuition administration. Let's not make this too complicated. Like, you should be responsible for the direction of the program and the policy. Let other people handle the administration. Offer greater support for more strategically relevant degrees. So there's an argument to say we'll pay 100% for analytics and computer engineering. Everything else we pay up to 5250. Consider wraparound services and activities for programs to keep participants engaged. Detroit Dives degrees have great resources, and don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. Okay, so you want to have a program that basically accomplishes most of what you want, but don't try to over-engineer this thing, at least to start with. So that is all I got right now. We're going to stop for questions. I think we have about 1 minute after this. Christy's going to follow up with a few thoughts and ideas. Christy, do you have any quick last minute questions?
John, I think you've covered everything. We haven't seen any more come through.
No more questions. No more questions. All right. Then in that case, Christy, it's all you now.
Sure. Thank you, John. That was wonderful. Some really good discussion in the chat, some really good thoughts. I hope this is sort of a jumping off point for all of you to start thinking about this. We want to continue to be a resource for you at the Chamber. So I just want to share a few things that we have available to support you as you think through this more. First, this webinar and the 2 follow-up webinars that we'll be hosting later in the year are a supplement to a toolkit that we have worked with John to develop to really help you strategically think about this and improve or launch a tuition assistance program. So I'll put this in the chat, but we've got a workforce success toolkit that has calculators to help you figure out the numbers that John talked about earlier. It's got a sample policy so that you can just drop in your information and have sort of a turnkey tuition assistance policy. We've got case making materials to help you take this to your board or your leadership. We have a step-by-step implementation guide to really help you think through how to do this. We've got some data and case making materials. So just know that that's available. And we don't want you to have to use that alone. We want to help you through it. So if you need help from the chamber, please reach out. We want to do this in partnership with you. We have Jon with us on a long-term basis. So we're very open to doing learning communities, so you can talk with your peers and with Jon in more detail, but we really want to support you as you develop these programs. We also have partnered with a national organization on a survey that employers can use as a diagnostic to really understand their employees' education goals and barriers and how they currently understand or perceive your education programs. So this is a survey that gets sent out to your employees to really capture, like, where are they in their education journey? Where would they like to go? And how can you better support them? Which is a really good diagnostic tool as you're starting these conversations to build programs in response to the barriers and the needs of your workers. So if you're interested in doing that at your company, would love to talk to you about it. It's free. We can help you set that up. And we have the national organization who does the data analysis. And that's also pretty turnkey for you. Like I said, we've got staff dedicated to this at the chamber, and we really want to help you through this. This is a big priority of ours and want to continue to be a resource. So we will follow up. My contact information is listed here, but you'll get a follow-up email from us shortly. That includes the recording, the slides, some of the resources we talked about, like our toolkit, some of those ROI reports from Lumina. And we'll have an event survey that'll allow you to indicate if you want to learn more. So if you do want to talk to us and get some additional resources, you will be able to indicate that on the survey, or just reach out to me directly. My email is right here. But please know we're in this for the long term and want to support you on an ongoing basis. So really looking forward to talking to some of you more. And with that, I think that concludes our presentation. Thanks again to Jon for delivering such an awesome presentation today and sharing such great information. And thank you all for spending a morning with us, and looking forward to talking more soon. Bye, everyone.